Isabella Carter had it all: luxury, success, and admiration, but deep inside she knew something was missing. On a cold, stormy night in New York, her world shifted when she spotted a young girl, Sophia, standing in the rain, cradling a baby. With compassion and urgency, Isabella welcomed them into her life, only to discover a deeper mystery tied to the girl's missing mother. What started as a simple act of kindness spirals into a dangerous journey, where Isabella must protect Sophia and Gabriel from a hidden threat that grows more ominous by the minute. As secrets unravel, Isabella is pulled into a world far darker than she could have ever imagined, forcing her to question how far she's willing to go to save two innocent lives. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain poured down in relentless sheets as if the heavens themselves had decided to weep. It wasn't the gentle, soothing kind of rain that brought a sense of peace. It was an angry, unforgiving storm. The kind that seemed to seep into your bones and remind you just how small and fragile you truly were. The streets of New York, usually bustling with life and energy, now felt desolate, cold, and indifferent. The city, with all its lights and towering buildings, seemed distant, an unfeeling machine grinding on while the storm raged. Isabella Carter gripped the steering wheel of her sleek, luxurious car, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. She hated nights like this. The isolation of the storm mirrored something deep within her, something she couldn't quite name but felt with every fiber of her being. New York's glittering skyline, usually a symbol of her success, now felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had and everything she lacked. The rain splattered against her windshield, the blurred glow of headlights ahead creating a distorted view of the world, much like the distorted reflection of her own life. Traffic had come to a standstill, as if the universe itself had pressed pause, forcing her to confront the gnawing emptiness that clung to her like a second skin. At 42, Isabella had reached the pinnacle of success. She was a force to be reckoned with in the business world. A woman whose name carried weight in both corporate boardrooms and charity galas. She had the kind of life people envied: designer clothes, a stunning apartment, high-profile friends, and a reputation for brilliance. Yet, in the quiet moments when the world stopped moving, she felt a void so deep it terrified her. Tonight, that void seemed larger than ever, an abyss swallowing her whole. She had just left another meaningless event, another gathering where everyone smiled politely, exchanged pleasantries, and pretended like any of it mattered. As she nodded and smiled, agreeing with whatever was said, a familiar sense of detachment crept in. The applause and admiration meant nothing. What good was success if you had no one to share it with? What good were accomplishments when, at the end of the day, all you felt was an aching loneliness that no amount of money could fix? The rhythmic tapping of rain against the car roof was almost comforting, a dull white noise that allowed her thoughts to wander, organizing the chaos in her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, trying to steady herself. But the reprieve was short-lived. A flicker of movement on the sidewalk caught her eye, and when she turned her head, her heart stopped. There, across the street, standing in the torrential downpour, was a little girl. She was barefoot, her small frame shivering violently from the cold. In her arms, she held a baby, wrapped in a soaked blanket that clung to the tiny body like a second skin. The girl's dark hair was plastered to her face, her wide, panicked eyes darting around as if searching for someone. It was a scene ripped from a nightmare, a haunting image that pierced through the fog of Isabella's thoughts and hit her like a sponge. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. For a moment, Isabella couldn't move. She sat frozen, staring at the pitiful sight before her. The world around her seemed to fade into the background, the roar of the storm muffled by the pounding of her own heart. That child, so small, so vulnerable, was standing alone in the middle of the storm, as if the world had abandoned her. A wave of emotion surged through Isabella, a mix of anger, sorrow, and a fierce protective instinct she hadn't felt in years. How could anyone leave a child like that? How could the universe be so cruel? Without thinking, Isabella's hands moved on their own. She flicked on the hazard lights and pulled her car to the side of the road, her heart hammering in her chest. The instinct that drove her to act was almost primal, a deep, guttural need to help, to protect. She wasn't the impulsive type. Her life was ruled by logic and control, but something about that little girl, standing there so helplessly in the rain, ignited something inside her. something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her umbrella and stepped out of the car. The rain hit her like a wall of ice, soaking through her clothes in an instant. She didn't care. Her focus was on that child, standing there with the baby in her arms. Isabella's heels clicked against the wet pavement as she hurried toward them, her umbrella offering little protection against the fierce storm. Her heart ached with every step. Each second that passed felt like an eternity. "Hey," she called out, her voice shaky but filled with urgency. "What are you doing out here in this storm, and with a baby?" "Ah." The girl flinched, taking a step back, clutching the baby closer to her chest. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto Isabella, full of fear and mistrust. She was drenched, her small body trembling so hard it was a wonder she hadn't collapsed yet. Isabella's heart broke at the sight. This child, this innocent little soul, was out here alone in the freezing rain, and all Isabella could think was, why? Why was she here? Where was her family, who had left her to face this nightmare on her own? "It's okay," Isabella said, her voice softening, though her own emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're freezing, and that baby, you're both soaked. Please come with me. My car is warm. I can help you. I won't hurt you, I promise." The girl took another step back, her gaze flickering between Isabella and the street as if weighing her options. Her small frame was shaking so violently now that Isabella feared she might collapse at any moment. The baby, silent and still, was wrapped so tightly in the drenched blanket that Isabella couldn't even see its face. The girl's fear was palpable, but so was her desperation. Isabella could see it in her eyes, the need for help, the terror of accepting it. For the first time in years, Isabella felt truly alive, not in the hollow, performative way she had been living her life, but in a way that made her heart race and her mind clear. She needed to save this child. She needed to do something. The emptiness that had haunted her for so long seemed to shrink, replaced by a fierce, protective love for this stranger, a love that made her feel whole, if only for a moment. "Please," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking, "let me help you." And in that moment, standing in the rain with a child who had been abandoned by the world, Isabella Carter felt something stir deep within her, something that had been missing for far too long. When Sophia emerged from the bathroom, she was wrapped in a towel, her small body cleaner but still weighed down by exhaustion and fear. Her wide eyes darted nervously around the room, never settling for long. The innocence of her face was marred by the deep weariness that no child should ever have to carry. "How's Gabriel?" she asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's fine, sweetheart. He's sleeping now," Isabella replied with a gentle smile, hoping to reassure her. "But now we need to take care of you. I made some hot soup. How about you sit down and have a little?" Sophia hesitated, as if the simple act of sitting at a table was something foreign to her at that moment. Her eyes flicked toward Isabella, wary and uncertain, but the gnawing hunger in her belly must have been stronger than her doubts. Slowly, she moved to the kitchen table, her thin frame looking even smaller in Isabella's spacious apartment. She sat quietly, almost shrinking into herself as she picked up the spoon and took her first hesitant bite. The warmth of the soup seemed to ease some of the tension in her face, but the silence that stretched between them was thick with unspoken fears. Isabella sat across from her, watching the girl's every move, her heart aching with empathy. She could barely imagine what Sophia had gone through, what horrors she must have witnessed in the days she'd been left alone. "Do you know where your mother went?" Isabella asked softly, not wanting to push too hard, but desperate to understand the situation. Sophia shook her head, her small hands gripping the spoon tighter, her eyes downcast. For a moment it seemed like she wouldn't say anything more, but then, with a voice so fragile it sounded like it might break, she finally answered. "Mom was scared," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "She said we had to leave the city. She was always on the phone with someone, but she wouldn't let me hear. I think she was running away from someone." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Isabella's heart clenched. Whoever her mother had been speaking to, whoever she had been running from, it had been enough to abandon her children to fend for themselves. The thought was unbearable. How could someone be so frightened that they would leave their children alone, vulnerable, in a city like New York? Isabella reached out and placed a hand over Sophia's, hoping the warmth of her touch would offer some comfort. "Don't worry, Sophia. We'll find your mother, I promise," she said, her voice steady, though inside she felt anything but. "But for now, you and Gabriel are safe here with me. I won't let anything happen to you." Sophia looked up at her, uncertainty clouding her big brown eyes. But for the first time that night, there was something else, a flicker of hope. It was faint and fragile, like a candle barely surviving the wind, but it was there. And in that moment, Isabella knew she would do anything to keep that hope alive. As the night wore on, Isabella moved quietly through the apartment, creating a makeshift crib for Gabriel in the guest room. The baby stirred but didn't wake, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully under the blanket. With a soft sigh, Isabella tucked him in, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time, a fierce, protective love that took her by surprise. She then turned to Sophia, who was already sitting on the bed in the adjoining room, her small shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The girl had stopped resisting, too tired to fight anymore. As Isabella tucked her into bed, pulling the soft covers up to her chin, she felt a wave of tenderness wash over her. "You're safe now," Isabella whispered, smoothing Sophia's damp hair away from her face. "Get some rest. I'll be right here if you need anything." As she turned off the light and began to walk away, she heard a soft voice from the darkness. "Thank you." Isabella paused, her hand still on the doorframe, her heart tightening at the simple, heartfelt words. "You don't need to thank me, Sophia," she said gently, her voice filled with warmth. "You and Gabriel are safe now. That's all that matters." With that, she quietly closed the bedroom door, leaving the children to the first peaceful sleep they had likely had in days. But as she stood in the hallway, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the distant sound of rain still tapping against the windows, Isabella felt the weight of the night pressing down on her. This wasn't just about sheltering two children for a few hours. Their lives had been upended, and whether she was ready or not, she was now a part of their story. The enormity of it all, of what lay ahead, was daunting. But for the first time in years, Isabella felt as though her life had real meaning again. She didn't know what the future held for Sophia, Gabriel, or herself, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let these children face it alone. Isabella's heart sank as she watched Sophia sit there, staring at the untouched plate of food. She could see the exhaustion etched on the girl's face, the weight of the world pressing down on her small shoulders. Whoever Sophia's mother had been running from, it was clear that it wasn't just the fear of being alone that haunted the girl. There was something deeper, something darker lurking behind her cautious eyes. And now Isabella was beginning to feel the magnitude of what she had stepped into. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "Don't worry, Sophia, we'll find your mother, I promise," Isabella said, her voice firm yet gentle. Though inside she wrestled with her doubts. She was stepping into a situation far more dangerous than she'd imagined, and she wasn't entirely sure what she was up against. But one thing was clear: she couldn't abandon these children. "For now, you two are safe here with me?" Sophia looked at her with uncertainty, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. It was faint, almost fragile, but it was there. Isabella held onto that flicker, knowing that it might be the only thing keeping the girl grounded at this moment. As the night wore on, Isabella put Gabriel to sleep in a makeshift crib in the guest room. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell with soft, even breaths, his face peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. Isabella couldn't help but marvel at how innocent and vulnerable he looked, oblivious to the world of uncertainty they had all stepped into. She then led Sophia to the adjoining room, where the girl finally collapsed onto the bed, too exhausted to continue resisting. Her small body curled up under the blankets, as though trying to shield herself from the outside world. As Isabella turned off the light, she heard Sophia's faint voice break the silence. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, her words fragile, barely audible in the darkness. "You don't need to thank me, Sophia. You and Gabriel are safe now," Isabella replied softly, her voice full of warmth and reassurance, though her heart still ached for the child. She gently closed the bedroom door, leaving the girl to what she hoped would be a restful sleep. Isabella walked back to the living room, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the apartment was now bathed in a stillness that felt almost eerie. Something about the situation felt unsettlingly familiar, as though it was tugging at an old memory buried deep in her past, one she couldn't quite grasp. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. This was something much bigger, something that was quickly pulling her into a web she didn't fully understand yet. That night, alone in her apartment, Isabella realized that this was only the beginning. The question, who was chasing Sophia's mother, why had she been running, echoed in her mind, demanding answers. There was a sense of urgency now, a need to unravel the mystery before it caught up to them all. Yet, Beneath the anxiety, there was something else, a quiet sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The emptiness that had haunted her for so long was slowly being replaced, as if the presence of these children had awakened something deep within her. As the morning light softly filtered through the window, Isabella knew she couldn't sit idly by. She needed to act. There was no guide for this, no clear path forward, but doing nothing wasn't an option. She moved quietly through the apartment, preparing breakfast while Gabriel slept peacefully in the other room. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air, bringing a small sense of normalcy to the otherwise tense situation. Suddenly, she heard the soft pattern of footsteps behind her. When she turned, Sophia was standing at the kitchen door, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but her expression guarded. The wariness hadn't left her, and Isabella could see the battle going on inside the girl, the pull between fear and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she was safe. "Good morning," Isabella said with a gentle smile, trying to break through the wall of uncertainty. "Come sit down. I made something for you." Sophia hesitated for a moment before cautiously approaching the table. She sat down, but her movements were slow and deliberate, as though she was still deciding whether to trust the kindness being offered to her. She stared at the plate of toast and eggs in front of her, her thin fingers picking up a piece, but she didn't eat right away. Instead, she just stared down at the food, lost in thought, as if her mind was miles away. "How are you feeling today?" Isabella asked, her tone light but laced with concern. Sophia shrugged, her gaze still fixed on the plate. The silence between them was thick, and Isabella could sense the walls Sophia had built around herself, a fortress of self-protection. She was a child, but the weight of what she had experienced had already hardened her in ways no child should ever have to endure. "I know you must be worried about your mother," Isabella ventured, testing the waters, her voice gentle. Sophia gave a small nod but still didn't look up. Her silence spoke volumes, and Isabella could see the fear bubbling just beneath the surface, the kind of fear that doesn't fade easily, the kind that leaves scars. "I promised I'd help find her. Remember," Isabella continued, leaning forward slightly, trying to meet the girl's downcast eyes. "But for that, I need you to trust me. I need to know more about what happened before she disappeared." For a long moment, it seemed like Sophia wouldn't respond. The tension in the air was palpable, and Isabella held her breath, waiting, hoping. Finally, Sophia's small voice broke through the silence, shaky and uncertain. "She was scared," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "She said we had to leave the city. She was always talking on the phone with someone, but she wouldn't let me hear. I think she was running away from someone." Isabella's heart sank. The fear in Sophia's voice and the mystery of her mother's disappearance all pointed to something much darker than she had anticipated. And now, these children, Sophia and Gabriel, were alone, unprotected, caught in the middle of whatever danger had forced their mother to flee. Isabella reached out, placing a hand gently on Sophia's arm. "We'll figure this out together, okay? You and Gabriel are safe here. No one is going to hurt you." Sophia finally looked up, her brown eyes filled with uncertainty. But there was something else, a glimmer of trust, fragile but growing. Isabella knew it would take time, but she was determined to protect these children no matter what. As the morning sun rose higher, casting its light over the quiet city, Isabella made a silent promise to herself. Whatever it took, she would uncover the truth. She would protect Sophia and Gabriel from whatever or whoever was out there. This was only the beginning, but she was ready for whatever came next. Sophia hesitated for a moment, her small fingers trembling as she set the toast down. Finally, she looked up at Isabella, her wide eyes brimming with the weight of unspoken fear. "Mom said we had to leave the house," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, each word laced with anxiety. "She said they were after her, and if we didn't leave soon, they would find us." Isabella felt a cold shiver run down her spine. That one word hung in the air like a dark cloud. Whoever these people were, they had forced a mother to run, leaving her children to fend for themselves. "Who are these people?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Even though an urgency crept into her tone, she had to know. Every piece of information mattered. Sophia shook her head slightly, her face tightening as she fought to hold back tears. I don't know. Mom never told me much, but I heard her on the phone once. She said she was going to try one last job, that she needed the money to get us away, but she never came back." Sophia's voice cracked, and she quickly turned her face away, wiping at her eyes as tears threatened to spill over. Her bravery in that moment, the way she struggled to stay composed despite the enormity of her fear, hit Isabella hard. "She never came back," Sophia repeated softly, her voice like a broken echo. Isabella stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. "One last job." The phrase repeated in her mind, hinting at something dangerous, something criminal. Sophia's mother had been involved in something far more serious than Isabella had first thought. And now her disappearance had left these children vulnerable, tangled in a web of danger they couldn't possibly understand. Isabella leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on Sophia's. "We'll find her," she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. "I promise you, Sophia, I won't leave you two alone." Sophia wiped her eyes quickly, forcing herself to regain control. She picked up the toast again, nibbling at it as if the small action would keep the tears at bay. Isabella watched her, her heart aching for the little girl. No child should have to bear such a burden. After breakfast, Isabella knew she had to act, but she also understood that whatever Sophia's mother had been involved in was dangerous, possibly more dangerous than either of them realized. Calling the police seemed like the logical next step, but instinct told her that it might expose Sophia and Gabriel to even more danger. If her mother had been running from dangerous people, going to the authorities could trigger something catastrophic. Isabella decided to start investigating on her own. "Sophia," she said gently, her voice soft but insistent, "I'm going to need to know more about your mom if I'm going to help. Do you remember where she worked, or maybe someone she talked to a lot?" Sophia thought for a moment, her brow furrowing as she sifted through memories, trying to pull out the relevant details. "She worked at a restaurant. I think it was called D'Angelo's. It was the only place she stayed at for a long time. The other jobs, she always ended up leaving." D'Angelo's. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of it. It was a well-known restaurant in the city, catering to a middle to upper-class clientele. But beneath the surface, there were rumors of illicit activities, of shady dealings behind the polished facade. It wasn't just a restaurant. There were whispers in the financial circles she frequented, suggesting it was involved in something far more sinister. While Sophia tended to Gabriel in the guest bedroom, Isabella quietly excused herself to the living room, her mind already racing. She needed to know more. Picking up the phone, she made a few calls to old contacts, discreetly gathering information about D'Angelo. As the pieces began to fall into place, a cold realization settled over her. The restaurant wasn't just a front for illegal activity, it was tied to a larger network, a dangerous one. People who got involved with D'Angelo's were often running from something or someone, and it rarely ended well. Isabella's pulse quickened as the gravity of the situation hit her. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Sophia's mother hadn't just been working at a restaurant. She had been entangled in something dark, something that had likely put her life and her children's lives at risk. The thought made Isabella's stomach churn. She had walked into this situation wanting to help, but it was rapidly becoming something far more dangerous than she could have anticipated. The room felt colder as she put the phone down, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She wasn't just dealing with 2 abandoned children anymore, she was dealing with the fallout of something criminal, something that could spiral out of control. Despite the resources and connections Isabella had, this was a situation that money and influence might not be able to fix. With every new detail she uncovered, the tension around her thickened. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed wasn't a hopeful one, it was a looming storm. And Isabella was standing directly in its path. The fear she felt wasn't just for Sophia and Gabriel anymore, it was for herself too. She had already become a part of this, tied to whatever their mother had been running from. There was no turning back now, no easy way out. All she could do was push forward, follow the trail, and hope she could protect these children from the darkness that seemed to be closing in. She glanced toward the bedroom where Sophia and Gabriel slept. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than before. This was only the beginning. Isabella sat back in the armchair, her mind swirling with the gravity of what she was about to do. The city outside her window buzzed with its usual energy, but for her, everything had narrowed down to a single point: Sophia and Gabriel. Protecting them meant stepping into a world she barely understood, a dark, unseen labyrinth of danger that left her both anxious and resolute. From that moment on, there was no turning back. As the day crept into late afternoon, a decision formed within her. She could no longer sit idle, hoping for answers to fall into her lap. If Sophia's mother had been involved in something criminal, Isabella needed to uncover the truth, and that meant venturing into circles far removed from her own pristine life. She had wealth, connections, and resources, but those weren't the tools she needed now. This world operated on different rules, and she would have to be careful. By the time the first signs of nightfall began to darken the New York skyline, Isabella made up her mind. She grabbed her purse, threw on a jacket, and prepared to take the first step into the unknown. She looked over at Sophia and Gabriel, who were now more relaxed but still carried the fragility of their situation in their eyes. "I'm going out for a few hours," Isabella said, kneeling to Sophia's level. Her voice was calm, but inside she was anything but. "I promise I'll be back soon. Stay here, lock the doors, and take care of Gabriel. I trust you, okay?" Sophia's eyes reflected a deep fear of abandonment, a fear that made Isabella's chest tighten. "You'll come back, right?" Sophia asked, her voice wavering with uncertainty. Isabella nodded, reaching out to gently hold the girl's hand. "Yes, I will. I promise. But I need to do this to help you and Gabriel. I can only find the answers if I know what's going on." Sophia gave a reluctant nod, but Isabella could tell her reassurance hadn't fully dispelled the girl's fear. It mirrored the fear she felt herself venturing into a world where she had no control, no familiar footing. As Isabella left the apartment and climbed into her car, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Each turn of the wheel, each street she crossed, felt like a step deeper into something dangerous, yet unavoidable. Her first stop, D'Angelo's. She had no plan, just a gnawing need for answers. The restaurant loomed in her mind, its name echoing like a warning. On the surface, it was nothing more than an upscale establishment, known for hosting New York's elite. But behind its polished exterior, rumors swirled. There were whispers of blackmail, influence peddling, and under-the-table deals that had ruined lives. Isabella had never paid attention to these rumors before. She'd always kept her distance from anything that could tarnish her perfect life. But now, those stories felt like breadcrumbs leading her to the truth about Sophia's mother. As she parked her car on a quiet side street near D'Angelo's, the chill of the night air wrapped around her, a stark contrast to the warmth she'd left behind in her apartment. She paused for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. This was it. She was about to walk into the unknown. The restaurant looked exactly as one would expect from the outside, elegant, refined, a beacon of sophistication in the heart of the city. But Isabella's instincts, honed from years of navigating high society, told her there was more beneath the surface. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable, that only someone accustomed to reading people could detect. She could feel it the moment she stepped through the doors. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" The hostess greeted her with a practiced smile, her demeanor polished and welcoming. But Isabella wasn't here for pleasantries. "I'm here for dinner," Isabella replied, her smile just as polished, her tone casual as she kept up the facade. "Table for one." The hostess nodded and led her through the softly lit dining room, where couples and businessmen murmured over fine wine and gourmet dishes. Everything about the place screamed exclusivity, from the marble floors to the understated luxury of the decor. But as Isabella scanned the room, her senses sharpened. She wasn't here to enjoy the ambience, she was here for answers. Somewhere within this restaurant lay the key to Sophia's mother's disappearance, and possibly the danger that now shadowed the children's lives. Isabella was seated at a small table near the back, close enough to the bar where she could observe the flow of people coming and going. She thanked the hostess and sat down, pretending to browse the menu. Her mind, however, was racing. How did she even begin? What questions could she ask without drawing suspicion? A waiter approached, offering her a glass of wine. She accepted it, though she barely tasted it. Her thoughts were elsewhere, trying to piece together a strategy. She needed information, but she couldn't risk revealing too much. If the wrong people found out she was asking questions, it could lead back to Sophia and Gabriel, and that was a risk she wasn't willing to take. As she sipped her wine, she overheard snippets of conversation from the bar. Names, places, business deals. It was clear that D'Angelo's was more than just a restaurant. It was a hub for connections, a place where the city's elite came to talk about things best left out of the public eye. Isabella's instincts told her she wasn't far off. After a few minutes, she caught the eye of the bartender, a man who looked like he had seen more than his fair share of secrets. She waited until he came over, his expression neutral but watchful. "What can I get you, Mom?" he asked, his voice low, but with a hint of curiosity. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her tone casual, but with an edge of seriousness. "I'm looking for someone. A woman who used to work here a few months ago. Her name was Emily. I'm trying to find out what happened to her." The bartender's eyes flickered with recognition for a split second before his face returned to its practiced calm. "Can't say I know much about that," he said carefully. "People come and go here all the time." Isabella's pulse quickened. He knew something, she was certain of it, but pressing too hard might close the door she was trying to open. She had to play this carefully. "People like Emily don't just disappear," Isabella replied softly, meeting his gaze with a calm intensity. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know what happened. Someone's life depends on it." The bartender hesitated, his eyes scanning the room as if checking to see who might be listening. Finally, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You didn't hear it from me, but she was mixed up in something she shouldn't have been. Some people noticed. They don't like loose ends." He straightened up, his tone returning to its professional politeness. "Anything else I can get you?" Isabella shook her head, her heart pounding as she processed his words. Loose ends. People who noticed. Sophia's mother had been in over her head, and now it seemed that danger had followed her children. As she sat there, pretending to enjoy the rest of her dinner, Isabella knew one thing for sure: whatever world Sophia's mother had been running from, it wasn't done with them yet. As the hostess led Isabella to a table by the window, she couldn't help but feel a growing unease. The elegance of D'Angelo's, with its soft lighting and refined decor, belied the tension in the air. Men in expensive suits and women draped in designer dresses moved gracefully between tables, but their hushed conversations and furtive glances didn't speak of simple enjoyment. Isabella scanned the room, her eyes seeking patterns, whispered words, and veiled looks, anything that might reveal what was truly happening beneath the restaurant's polished surface. After ordering a glass of wine, Isabella settled into her chair, but her mind wandered. The whole situation with Sophia and Gabriel was unearthing parts of her own life that she had buried long ago. She had been so focused on material success, always striving for more wealth, more power, more control, yet there was always that gnawing emptiness. And now, with these children in her life, something had shifted. It wasn't just about finding their mother or protecting them from whatever danger lurked in the shadows. It was about confronting the void within herself, a void that, for some reason, had begun to fill the moment she took them in. What was it about these children that pulled her so deeply? Why did their plight resonate so profoundly with her? As these thoughts swirled in her mind, Isabella barely noticed a man approaching her table until he was standing right in front of her. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his gray hair neatly combed, every detail of his appearance carefully curated. But it was his eyes that made Isabella's heart quicken, sharp, calculating, as if they were always watching, always searching for an opportunity. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth yet slightly unnerving. "My name is Richard. I'm the owner of D'Angelo's. I couldn't help but notice you're dining alone. I hope you're enjoying our restaurant." There was something about the way he said it, the hint of something unspoken behind his polite smile. Isabella could sense that he knew she wasn't just another guest here for dinner. "Yes, it's lovely," she replied, forcing a casual tone as she smiled back. "I've heard wonderful things about this place. A friend of mine mentioned she worked here a while ago. Perhaps you know her." "Her name is Laura." Isabella watched carefully for his reaction. The name seemed to trigger a brief flicker in Richard's eyes, too quick to catch if you weren't paying attention. But it was there. He paused, just for a second, before his expression returned to one of polite indifference. "Laura," he repeated, drawing out the name as if searching his memory. "Yes, I remember her. She worked here for a time, but she left rather suddenly. I'm afraid I don't know what happened to her after that." His response was practiced, almost too smooth. It was clear he had given this answer before. Isabella could feel that Richard was hiding something, but she couldn't push too hard. Not yet. She needed to tread carefully. "That's unfortunate," she said, keeping her voice light. "I've heard she was going through some difficult times. I thought maybe you'd know something that could help me find her." Richard's smile faded slightly, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in, his demeanor becoming colder. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but as I said, she's gone. Whatever problems she had, they're no longer my concern." There was a finality to his words, a warning buried beneath the politeness. He knew more than he was letting on, but he wasn't going to reveal anything, at least not to a stranger. Before Isabella could respond, Richard straightened and gave a curt nod. "If you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." He walked away without waiting for a reply, leaving Isabella sitting at the table, her mind racing. She took a slow sip of her wine, trying to steady her thoughts. Richard's quick dismissal only confirmed her suspicions. Laura, or rather Sophia's mother, had been involved in something far more dangerous than Isabella had anticipated. And whatever that was, Richard didn't want her digging into it. Isabella watched him retreat to the far side of the restaurant, where he resumed mingling with the other patrons, his polished mask back in place. But the brief exchange had told her enough. She was now certain that D'Angelo's wasn't just a high-end restaurant, it was a hub, a front for something darker, and the man who owned it was a key player. As she sat there, observing the flow of people and the muted conversations around her, Isabella knew that this wasn't the end. Richard's cold dismissal hadn't deterred her, it had only sharpened her determination. If anything, the danger surrounding Sophia's mother had become more real, more urgent. And if Isabella wanted to protect the children, she would need to venture deeper into this world, despite the risks. She took another sip of wine, her mind already planning her next move. If Richard wouldn't talk, she would have to find someone who would. The sight of Sophia and Gabriel, so small and vulnerable, made Isabella's heart clench. They were blissfully unaware of the storm that was circling them, the danger that lurked so close. But Isabella knew now there was no time to waste. The people who were after Sophia's mother were ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt the children if it meant silencing their mother for good. Isabella quickly closed and locked the door behind her, trying to keep her movements calm even though her mind was racing. She took a moment to steady her breath, pushing down the fear that gripped her. She needed to think clearly, to act quickly. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Sophia, she said softly, approaching the girl with a forced calm. How are you holding up? Sophia looked up at her, her wide eyes betraying a mixture of worry and fatigue. I'm okay, she whispered, her voice small. Is everything all right? Isabella forced a smile, though inside her heart was pounding. Yes, everything is fine. But we need to make some changes. She crouched down next to Sophia, gently placing a hand on her arm. We're going to leave for a little while, okay? Somewhere safer. Sophia's eyes widened with confusion and fear. Are we in danger? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Isabella hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to tell the girl. She didn't want to frighten her more than she already was, but the truth was, the danger was closing in. I just think it's best if we go somewhere quieter for now, somewhere where no one can find us. Sophia glanced down at Gabriel, who was still fast asleep in her lap, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. But what about my mom? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Will she be able to find us? Isabella's heart ached at the question. Sophia's mother was at the center of this whole mess, and there was no telling if she would ever return. But for now, Isabella couldn't focus on finding her. She had to keep the children safe first. We'll leave her a way to reach us, Isabella reassured her, though the uncertainty gnawed at her. But right now, we have to protect you and Gabriel. Sophia nodded slowly, trusting Isabella without fully understanding the depth of the danger they were in. Isabella stood up, her mind already racing through possible plans. They couldn't stay in the apartment, it was too exposed. And now that she knew who was after Sophia's mother, there was no doubt that they would come looking for the children next. She needed to disappear, and she needed to do it fast. I'm going to pack some things, Isabella said, keeping her tone light for Sophia's sake. Just grab a few of your belongings. We won't need much. As she moved quickly through the apartment, grabbing essentials and stuffing them into a small bag, the gravity of the situation settled in fully. Richard and those men had been talking about eliminating loose ends. Sophia's mother was the loose end they wanted to cut off. But now Sophia and Gabriel were in danger of becoming collateral damage. Isabella wouldn't let that happen. Once everything was packed, she returned to the living room and helped Sophia gently lift Gabriel from her lap, careful not to wake him. We're going to leave now, Isabella said quietly, guiding Sophia toward the door. Stay close to me, okay? Sophia nodded, her fear evident but subdued by her trust in Isabella. As they stepped into the cold night, Isabella's heart pounded with urgency. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential danger. She hurried the children into the car, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching. Once they were safely inside, she started the engine and pulled out onto the darkened street. The city lights blurred past as she drove, her mind racing with possibilities. They needed a place where they could lay low, somewhere no one would think to look for them. Her mind went to an old friend, someone who owed her a favor and lived just outside the city. It wasn't perfect, but it would be safe for now. As she sped through the dark streets, Isabella's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her determination hardening with every passing mile. She had stepped into a world of danger she didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear: she would do whatever it took to protect Sophia and Gabriel. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore, this was about survival. As the story unfolds, we see Isabella being drawn deeper into a dangerous world in her quest to protect Sophia and Gabriel. From the tense atmosphere at D'Angelo's to the chilling discovery of the looming threats, Isabella's journey shows the weight of responsibility and the lengths one will go to safeguard the innocent. But what have you learned from this journey so far? Have you discovered the importance of trusting your instincts? Or perhaps you've recognized the power of stepping up to protect others in times of crisis? We invite you to reflect on one key lesson you've gained from this story and share it in the comments below. What will you take into your own life from Isabella's courageous decisions and the sacrifices she's willing to make for these children? If you like this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more gripping stories and life lessons. We appreciate your support, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts.